Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I'm Carol Davis, a registered member of the Navajo Nation. I'm also the coordinator director of Diné Citizens Against Ruining Our Environment, Diné Care, an all Navajo 501c3 nonprofit organization that began in a Navajo Nation community called Delcon in 1988. Our organization serves to protect the health, cultural resources, and the environment of the Diné people who reside within the approximate 27,400 square mile area we call the Navajo Reservation. Our reservation extends into the states of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. To begin, a result of multiple land jurisdictions, public, private, state, Navajo Trust, and Indian allotments, and the existence of split estates in the easternmost portion of the Navajo Reservation, an area most people know as the Greater Chaco region, the Navajo Nation, as a sovereign nation, has limited force of Navajo Nation law in that area. This enables and perpetuates environmental discrimination among the Navajo Nation communities throughout that region. In particular, the people's rights and voices are undermined by the lack of transparency in the federal mining leasing process. For example, tribal consultation has historically excluded the people's input because we are given the impression that one must have standing to oppose or comment on energy development. Additionally, language barriers and underdeveloped communication infrastructure frustrate the public input process because the Farmington Field Office of the Bureau of Land Management fails to adequately accommodate or resolve such barriers. Furthermore, 91% of public land in northwest New Mexico is already leased to oil and gas interests, with over 40,000 wells, with most of the remaining unleased land in the Greater Chaco region, despite the lack of adequate tribal consultation, environmental review, or a comprehensive plan for fracking in the area. Meanwhile, the Bureau of Land Management continues to grant hundreds of new drilling permits with 370 new wells and counting. An additional 843 acres are slated for oil and gas leasing during an online auction scheduled January 25th, 2017. Again, I'd like to just reiterate that a lot of the Navajo people in that community don't even have internet, so public input's going to almost be impossible during that leasing process. So the Navajo people directly impacted by fossil fuel development have the added communication infrastructure and language barrier because many people don't speak the language, the English language, to adequately voice their concerns throughout the public input process. Once new development is approved, there are added economic disadvantages to the impacted Navajo communities. Federal law requires that a percentage of royalties generated from oil and gas extraction must benefit communities directly affected by industry. 3 Navajo Nation communities, Huerfano, Nayezi, and Counselor, are subjected to the negative social, environmental, and health-related fallout of current rigorous horizontal and hydraulic fracking activities. In 2014, the state of New Mexico and the federal government collected roughly $12.5 to $14 million in oil royalties from these 3 Navajo Nation communities. The return on these royalties do not benefit these heavily fracked communities, but instead the funds are funneled to the state and counties, while the people who live in the midst of the oil wells and pipeline suffer. Very basically, the federal energy development process only perpetuates environmental discrimination in low-income tribal communities. Thank you.
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has abdicated its duty to work in concert with other federal and state agencies. It routinely fails in its format and procedure to engage and inform the public. FERC-mandated scoping meetings are one-sided affairs promoting jobs, community revenue, and local stimulus without informing the public about issues, hazards, and dangers to communities. In its regulatory capacity, the FERC should do more than simply approve projects. It should inform the public of critical information about the way in which such projects could threaten their communities. For example, the evacuation distance for a 42-inch pipeline at 1,440 psi is 2 miles. Most gas line breaches begin with an explosion followed by an incendiary fireball. The blast radius on such a pipeline is 1,800 feet, maximum damage radiating out to 3,600 feet, secondary heat damage. Most communities lack warning systems, evacuation plans, or an informed emergency response. In the event of a breach, thousands along these pipelines would be trapped on uphill slopes. Construction along the 556-mile ACP would require 1,100 miles of new access roads. These roads will be built off of existing state and county roads, many of which are one lane. This will impede emergency services' ability to respond to public need, as well as a tremendous burden of emergency response due to construction, traffic, and civil complaints as a result of construction. Construction of these roads will contribute to a loss of habitat, erosion, water, and soil degradation, and lowering of property values. In spite of all this construction, no provisions are made to ensure that every residence and business has an escape plan. Communities along these routes lack the necessary emergency services and equipment to deal with the pending disasters, especially in light of climate change. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security mandates that no critical infrastructure can be placed in an evacuation zone, yet the ACP is a mere 2,200 feet from Upshur County High School and 1,200 feet from the State Police Barracks. The blast radius for this pipeline is 3,600 feet. FERC is obviously not concerned for the mandates of this agency or basic safety considerations. FERC fails to verify data submitted by the applicant. Requests from local governments to the applicants are ignored. Projects should be halted until questions are answered. The idea that everything proceeds pending approval is unacceptable. The presidential memorandum accompanying Executive Order 12898 emphasizes the importance of using NEPA review processes to promote environmental justice. It directs federal agencies to analyze the environmental effects, including human health, economic, and social effects, of their proposed actions on minority and low-income communities. Reference there is at epa.gov, including those outlined or analyzed in EISs. The MVP has a disproportionate amount of poor and elderly along its route. By accepting the pipeline company's claim that the project would produce no significant harm to these communities, the FERC fails in its duty to comply with this NEPA standard. Thank you.
Like Ellen, I'm old, and I would do this on my phone, but I couldn't see it. Good afternoon. My name is James Michel. I'm part of a group that has spent the last 2 years resisting the construction of Spectra Energy's West Roxbury lateral pipeline. The lateral is a 5-mile spur off the AIM project. It cuts through the towns of Westwood and Dedham before entering the West Roxbury section of Boston. Designed to carry frack gas at 750 pounds per square inch, it makes its way through a densely populated urban neighborhood, past several schools, a nursing home, and terminates at a massive metering and regulating station located directly across the street from an active blast quarry. The quarry blasts occur weekly, and many local homeowners can point to foundation cracks and other structural damage. In a logical universe, regular seismic events right next to a high-pressure transmission pipeline might be seen as a formula for disaster. Not in FERC world. Early in the process, when the community started to understand what was being proposed, we learned that the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, prepared by GZA, a consulting group with a history of working with spectra, had been accepted by the FERC. A computer simulation was apparently enough to satisfy the FERC that the project did not present excessive risk. When the community, through interveners, asked to revisit the issue, presenting evidence by Mark McDonald, an independent natural gas safety expert, and presented evidence that repeated seismic activity could indeed impact the structural integrity of the pipeline, the FERC granted a tolling order that allowed construction to proceed as they mulled the request, which of course was ultimately denied several months later once construction was well launched. So please consider locating a high-pressure pipeline in an urban setting adjacent to an active blast quarry is not worth a second look. Equally egregious is the FERC's refusal to take a look at the larger picture. There's a strong case to be made that the real strategy for the multiple spectra projects, and we're talking about AIM, Access Northeast, Atlantic Bridge, there's a clue there, that name, Atlantic Bridge. The real strategy for these multiple projects, snaking their way across Massachusetts and the Northeast, is to export the product to more lucrative overseas markets. National Grid, the utility that filed documents with the FERC to justify this project, stated that it anticipated a 2,500% increase in demand for gas in the next decade. This, despite the fact that recent trends have been flat and, in fact, a little bit downward, correlated with Massachusetts' aggressive energy efficiency programs initiated under our Global Warming Solutions Act, which is landmark legislation passed in 2008 to confront climate change. National Grid, as it so happens, is a partner with Spectra in developing the northern route to Nova Scotia, where LNG facilities previously licensed for import are now licensed for export. So before I understood really the gravity of the human-caused climate crisis, I worked as a clinician and policymaker in the behavioral health care field. My resistance colleagues who are about to speak today included an IT project manager and yoga teacher, a city planner / communications professor, and a seminary-trained United Methodist minister / climate justice organizer. None of us, like you, probably, set out to be conversant about energy policy, the Natural Gas Act of 1938, or FERC procedures. Yet, here we all are. We are grassroots volunteers. We are Lilliputians trying hard to tie down the great Gulliver that is the fossil fuel industrial complex. In a better world, the one we're hoping to create, an agency such as the FERC would be delighted to see engaged citizens such as us and would think that it exists to serve us and our interests. So it's an honor to be with you all, my fellow Lilliputians. Let's keep working together to wake up America, and let's unite in the struggle to preserve a viable planet for future generations. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks. You can hear me okay? Okay, I'm Nancy Wilson. I'm one of the members of this group that James Michel mentioned. I live in the incineration zone of the West Roxbury Lateral Pipeline. I'm not actually an IT project manager. I'm actually a user experience consultant, if that makes anybody's hair stand on end or get excited. And I can tell you that this whole experience has been terrible. This has been a terrible, terrible user experience from start to finish, and it's going on still. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that's like, what the actual on-the-ground user experience has been as an inhabitant of the incineration zone. So I am going to read from my phone. I'm pretty old, but I have monovision, so it allows me to do that. So when the FERC first granted Spectra Energy Corporation the certificate to begin work on the West Roxbury Lateral Pipeline segment of AIM, the Algonquin Incremental Project, Incremental Market Project, CP 1496. When they denied their rehearing request with the standard tolling order, everybody knows that's the standard. You ask for a rehearing request, it's sort of automatic. You get a tolling order, okay? Now, if you listen to the FERC hearings, did anybody listen to those hearings last year, those oversight committee hearings? Oh, I really highly recommend it, because the reason that they give for the tolling order is because they're so busy approving all these projects that they just have to give a tolling order so that progress can be made, okay, while they consider the rehearing request, which they never do, okay? Except in our case, they actually did, and that's part of the story. Anyway, when they did this, they gave Spectra permission to sue the city of Boston and take their streets by eminent domain. I mean, this is pretty unprecedented, an entire city taken by eminent domain. And when the workers showed up, they showed up waving their certificates and saying, we own these streets. That's what they said to us. That's what they said to us. When the day one, when the inspectors from Boston just showed up as a courtesy, they waved their eminent domain certificates and said, we own these streets. Yeah, they're good, right? And that's what they did. And that gave them, the Spectra order, the FERC order gave them permission to begin construction at breakneck speed, because that's how they operate, as fast as possible, right? And that gave them permission to bypass the permitting process in Boston. Nobody enters the city of Boston without permits, okay? This is a standard thing, but not now. Now they've got eminent domain. So that allowed them to break a water main day one and ignore it, leaving people without water for many days in November. It gave them permission to dig up the streets and reroute bus lines without notice, creating traffic accidents and dangerous crossings. That happened over and over. It gave them permission to knock over a power line in the middle of a prolonged heat wave and leave people, young and old alike, without air conditioning for many days. It also gave them permission to break another water main, block a third one, and cover dig holes so negligently that a truck fell into it. It was a WIT truck. It was an inspectional services truck that fell into it. The irony of this was just amazing. I felt like my head was going to explode. And it gave them permission to start loud and disruptive work before 7 a.m. and continue beyond 10 p.m. 7 days a week throughout the entire process. And they gave them these rights, as you heard, to run a 750 PSI pipeline into the middle of a densely populated urban neighborhood that has 3 schools and a nursing home, opposite this live, active blasting quarry, where a home had formerly been, and the home crumbled. It was pancaked due to the seismic blasting that occurred on a weekly basis. But this is a good place to put the M&R station, and it's not your ordinary M&R station. It's a massive, multi-structure M&R station, and it's built on ledge. And these seismic events continue to happen every week. And the reason it's not underground is because it's built on ledge, and they couldn't build it underground, making it, in fact, a very high-value terrorist target, which was brought to the attention of what's his name, McMurray, who is the Homeland Security Administrator for the state of Massachusetts. And he agreed that this was a significant target. But when we asked him to do something about it, nothing happened. Does that sound familiar? So not only did they grant these extraordinary rights to this corporation with a terrible safety record, whose own former employees have gone on the record with evidence of their intentional disregard for safety. You may be familiar with the whistleblowers, the Spectra whistleblowers. If you haven't, go to Desmog blog and read about AIM Fire Ready, okay? They have an intentional disregard for safety. And the company, the FERC itself, placed under admittedly mild, as someone else said, I think it was Patrick, corrective action order for drilling without a permit. And which I think, if William Houston is here, I think they are currently under PIMSA corrective action order for 400 miles of infrastructure after the Salem, PA explosion. So the FERC gave them permission to do this. Okay, so not only did they allow them to self-certify the safety of locating a massive high-pressure M&R station at a blast site in this neighborhood, ignoring the reality, they approved the project in typical isolation, not looking at anything else. You guys are all familiar with the segmentation problems, right? So when the Massachusetts Attorney General requested a regional non-segmented review of their energy needs, she was refused. And when our senators asked for an investigation into powerful evidence of AIM inspectors' conflict of interest, Norman Bay replied that their ethics standards and review process covered that. It's a very smooth letter that he wrote. Okay, that's the way he talks. And when Massachusetts Senators Warren and Markey, to their credit, pressed for documentation supporting that claim, they were greeted with 3 months of silence, which perhaps not by chance coincided with the go-live date for the West Roxbury lateral pipeline. So let's just wait 3 months, not respond, but respond after we issue the order that this thing can go through, okay? So no COI can apply to this, right? When Congressman Stephen Lynch wrote to FERC Commissioner Bay requesting a moratorium on Spectra infrastructure projects in Massachusetts, pending investigations of recent and increasing gas pipeline explosions, that's due, we think, our local Massachusetts group of healthcare professionals against frack gas has done studies, obtained studies that show that there's more frequent explosions now because of the pace of activity. That same thing that's causing FERC so much trouble because they've got so much work is also creating such fast action, there are more explosions happening, okay? That's what's happening. So when he asked for a moratorium on construction on these kinds of projects in the state of Massachusetts, for waiting for completion of investigation into these explosions, makes sense, right? Let's investigate before we build this massive bomb in the middle of my city, in the middle of my state. They ignored him. They just didn't say anything back to Stephen Lynch. And when he asked again, after a second explosion, he petitioned them again and wrote a second letter. He's doing this independently of his own, just writing these letters. They issued approval for the West Roxbury lateral to go online. Okay? So even more amazing than this, and we're talking about news that's days old. This is just happening right now. Even more amazing than this was that this go-live order came through the FERC after they did not receive the promised emergency service and emergency responder briefings that Spectra said they would give them, which then meant that the mayor and the commissioner of the Boston Police Department and the head of the Boston Fire Department had to write petitioning letters to the FERC asking them to hold off on making this thing go live until they could get their emergency responder briefing. They had not gotten a heat map. They've gotten nothing, okay? And they're just supposed to say, okay, that letter is pending. We don't know the outcome of that. We're in an emergent, urgent situation here right now. So in response, residents and supporters of this opposition took the only action possible to halt the progress of this outrageous project. And yet, despite 194 acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, that's getting arrested. I've been arrested twice. My court case is pending. And yet, despite this, a minimum of 1,500 West Roxbury residents are facing the imminent reality of living in an incineration zone. Just like so many other populations affected by this very wrong process, we are now considered disposable. That's what we are. And as a region and a nation, we're facing the reality of becoming permanent subjects to an amoral fossil fuel corporatocracy. That's what we're looking at, okay? That's supported, not just supported, but promoted by an incoming administration. So, when a process that values the risk tolerance of corporations expanding operations for profit over the risk tolerance of the many, many people damned to live in the personal, public, and climate sacrifice zones that result, the process has to change. And that's why I think it's so important to have meetings like this and forums like this. This is what we need. That's what makes this so important that we're here. And I thank Maya and her organization, everybody who made the trip here, and everybody who's represented by everybody who's here, and all the people who are not represented but are here in spirit. That's what makes this so important. Because as we say when we're taking these actions, when we're getting arrested, we're sitting literally in the trenches, we say, the people united will never be defeated. So I thank you. I thank you for this forum and for a chance for us to prove that. Let's prove that. Amen.
I'm the minister. And true to form, everybody else started talking, and I started thinking, I have something different to say than what I prepared. So hopefully it is a coherent piece. My name's Marla Markham, and I'm a United Methodist minister and a founder of an organization called the Climate Disobedience Center. I'm here today, though, as a volunteer organizer with Resist the Pipeline, this Boston area grassroots group that you've been hearing about. We're committed to building a culture of resistance to fossil fuel business as usual. And I know most of you are as well. For the past year and a half, we've been doing this work in opposition to the Spectra AIM pipeline with particular focus on the West Roxbury lateral portion of the project. I'm really grateful for this convergence of kindred spirits, and I feel compelled to deliver a message about what FERC, the fossil fuel industry, and all of their accomplices can expect if they continue to follow a business as usual pathway. So this is more of a prediction than adding to the list of facts that have been shared with you here today. I think it's appropriate that my testimony falls near the end of the day because the tools I use and the tools I support others to use are a last resort of people who have exhausted all reasonable legal means of resistance to dangerous, unnecessary, and unwelcome fossil fuel infrastructure projects. You have heard hours of testimony today from people who have engaged FERC's regulatory process with the kind of discipline and dedication that should be met with gratitude by a responsible regulatory agency. In contrast, FERC treats our input with contempt, and that's absurd. And so as I listened to the testimony of so many of you, the courageous and loving people who traveled here today, I became more and more overwhelmed by this absurdity to any claim by FERC that it operates as a regulatory body. And so because I believe that humility is a virtue, I took a moment to look up the verb regulate in order to be sure I understood its meaning. So here's what I found. Control or supervise something by means of rules and regulations. So I knew what it meant. So then I asked myself, what exactly then does FERC regulate? Our collective testimony here today suggests that the only thing that FERC controls and supervises by means of rules and regulations is the voice and the will of the public. That's the only thing they have been controlling. And so I want to say that we, the representatives here of impacted communities, and ideally on behalf of so many more who couldn't be here, will no longer be regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I'm here to declare that fossil fuel business as usual is over. So given what we know about the impacts at every step of fossil fuel business as usual, from exploration, production, processing, transport, and combustion, those are just like environmental impacts in many people's minds, but we've also heard today about the cultural impacts and the social impacts. And of course, we understand that there are impacts currently at Standing Rock and in other places related to sovereignty. So given what we know about all of these impacts, construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure at this moment is morally indefensible. In the past year, 194 people, ranging in age from 15 to 89 years old, have been arrested blocking construction on the West Roxbury lateral portion of the Spectra AIM pipeline. This is not a stunt. It's not a stunt. This is a sustained campaign of principled, nonviolent civil disobedience engaged at just one of the points of harm created by this project. I'm here today to make clear that the culture of resistance to fossil fuel business as usual is growing, and we bring into this fight a kind of power that FERC and the industry cannot withstand and cannot access. And that's the power of our bodies, our spirits, and our deep love for one another and for future generations. Now, individuals within that whole system I just named could access those things if they wanted to join us. But as a system, they do not have access, in my estimation, to this kind of power. It's the power of vulnerability, chosen vulnerability, when we put ourselves in the way. In early June this year, I read that people in Pakistan were digging mass graves in advance of a predicted heat wave. A gravedigger who was interviewed by Reuters expressed gratitude for the foresight of digging these graves, saying, "Thanks be to God that this year we will be prepared." When I saw then a photo of the empty mass grave, I recognized that it was a long, narrow trench. It looked just like the pipeline trench that we'd been fighting in West Roxbury. And when the heat wave came and they filled up that grave, they did so by laying bodies head to foot, wrapped in white sheets. And the photo looks like a pipeline in a trench. And so at the end of that month, in late June, 250 people gathered at our pipeline trench in West Roxbury to take responsibility for the fact that this trench would be responsible for creating mass graves for now in other parts of the world. And in solidarity with their colleagues in Pakistan who were forced to stand over that anticipatory climate mass grave and try to make sense of it as they closed it up for their community, Boston area clergy practiced their own mass graves eulogies. And we all mourned the fact that we have entered the era of anticipatory climate mass graves. Now, the police were there in force, and so we went away after our observance to convince them that we were finished for the day. But we came back 2 hours later with 13 people taking their places in the trench as a symbolic mass grave and 12 others joining them at street level, refusing to leave. And these 25 people blocked construction for 2 hours as nearly 100 others stood on the sidewalk in solidarity, showing their support for this action. One of those who entered the trench was 21-year-old Sophia Wolanski. Now, you may have heard of Sophia. She missed her November 22nd court date with her co-defendants for this action that I just described because the day before her arm was severed by a concussion grenade targeting her as she joined other peaceful water protectors at Standing Rock. While we were in court, Sophia was in surgery in Minneapolis in an attempt to save her arm, an attempt that's still underway. I'm grateful to the water protectors on site who saved her life, but I want to say that the militarized police response to peaceful water protectors at Standing Rock is a national shame, and we have no reason to expect that that is the only place that we will see that kind of use of force in this country. Ours is a movement led by spirit-filled bodies, paramount among them the water protectors at Standing Rock. I also want to say that the guilty verdict handed down today in Peekskill, New York, in the case of the Montrose 9 who peacefully blocked access to equipment necessary to build the Spectre AIM pipeline, that will not deter us. Concussion grenades will not deter us. Guilty verdicts will not deter us. And that's because the grassroots are growing and we're visionary, and we will not be regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We expect our federal regulatory agencies to provide and promote the health and to protect and promote the health and safety and long-term sustainability of our communities, but the days of waiting for the leadership of such agencies are over. As you've seen here today, people in every corner of this country are fighting for our communities already. Over 800 people signed our pledge to support active resistance to the construction of the West Roxbury lateral pipeline, and over 400 of them committed to engage in acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, risking arrest if necessary to stop the project. And I want to say to you, most of these people are folks who've never done anything like that, not even remotely like it. They're not activists moving from cause to cause. They don't want to risk arrest in order to protect their communities. But they've tried every other option available to them, and they have come to the end of their legal options. All of their elected leaders agree with them and support them. It hasn't mattered. I've been reflecting in recent days on these following words attributed to St. Augustine. Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they don't remain as they are. For now, we see that we need to build our own hope by nonviolently and courageously harnessing the power of our anger. Our numbers grow every day. If FERC will only seek to regulate our power, then we will take the lead with the only power we have to transform the system in this situation. We will shut it down with our bodies, sustained by our love for one another and the world that is threatened by the most powerful industry we've ever known. So we need you to get angrier with us, not you, the people you symbolically represent. And we recognize that this will require courage, but I know that we're all equal to the task.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Horn. I'm the city planner guy. With a little breaking news and just a personal reflection, I recall in my first city planning job back in the early 70s, Boston communities were involved in a big struggle against a new highway that would have slashed through a number of inner city communities. Property had been taken, buildings demolished, engineering well underway. Federal government was funding the large part of it. Communities got together and ultimately stopped this project. Someone whispered to me a few minutes ago, listening to all this testimony, this is pretty discouraging, and I nodded agreement. But in another larger sense, I think we can all take great encouragement from today's very eloquent, very passionate, very moving testimony from many of you. I don't need to recount all the indignities that West Roxbury has suffered, but one of the pieces of good news here is that we've gotten together with other communities facing similar egregious actions by FERC and its contractors, Rehoboth, Weymouth, other communities who are in the earlier stages of fighting those pipelines, and we will be working together with them. Interesting enough, yesterday I got to meet Cheryl LaFleur, who I never met before. We did deliver Valentine's cards to her house in nearby Wellesley, Massachusetts, this past February. She wasn't home, no response there. She spoke at the Consumer Liaison Group, a voice for the consumer in the electric industry yesterday, part of the Attorney General's operation. She's a very nice lady, well-spoken, intelligent, likes the Patriots. Had a chance to chat with her just a bit, and I said to her, and to all those who were gathered there, who probably most of them didn't realize this, that tomorrow, meaning today, in Washington, D.C., dozens of communities will be coming together to express their outrage at the treatment they have suffered or are facing threats from FERC and or its companies under its supposed oversight. I wanted everyone in that room to hear that, and everyone did hear that. So I take encouragement. We had a little chat about it, but as you can imagine, in that setting, there wasn't any particular substantive discussion. She seemed woefully ignorant of some of the particulars of the West Roxbury lateral pipeline, including the distance of this metering and regulating station from the active blasting quarry you heard about. And I said, no, you know, you really should take a ride by, Ms. LaFleur. And she promised, she said she would do that. Interesting that you would think, she's got a lot on their plate, but you would think that a commissioner and local resident would, out of sheer curiosity, want to drive by at least incognito to see what all the fuss was about. So I'm hoping that we will do that. We're now in touch with her. She knows we're not ogres, and we may not demonize her quite as much, but we will continue to pursue this. Second and last piece of news, my colleagues and I chose the opportunity today to meet with our senators, Markey and Warren, who it is fair to say we have not stood up to the plate as much as we would like, certainly not as much, not as forcefully and articulately as our Congressman Lynch. So we impressed upon them the urgency of this situation. We have, as politely as we could, demanded that they insist on a moratorium to this startup operation until adequate, reliable, meaningful safety and health studies can be done, seismic studies and the rest, and call a halt to that. We will continue working hard on that. They've heard from us. We'll keep the pressure up. We suggest you do, of course, as you are, I'm sure, with your elected representatives, and let's go forth united. This arrangement today, this meeting today, has given us all new strength and resolve. Thank you.
Hey, folks, just a quick, we have this room till about 4:30 or a little bit after 4:30, and they throw us out on the street, I think. So just to keep in mind with the testimony, I know we had a lot of time up front, extra time. Now we're sort of bumping up against time. So if you can keep your testimony to what you prepared.
Like how he says that when I come up.
I know, it's terrible. Sorry.
Whatever.
Okay, go on and on.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. We are the canaries in the coal mine, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you guys. So thank you. My name is Lizzie Victor, and I live in Ohio. And I am a board member for Neighbors Against Nexus, the Fulton County Common Sense Energy Coalition, and CORN. I am in forensic medicine. I'm a forensic scientist and researcher. I conduct research on different areas of the legal system. One area which I conducted quite a bit of research is toxic torts and juror competence in complex litigation. I know that sounds like a mouthful. I also have a great research interest in how people come to understand the law and how their rights and about their rights under the law. And I've done this type of research for close to 30 years. So it's a tremendous irony that I find myself in my own toxic tort, my family, my neighbors, my community, in the midst of big energy pipeline fight. We are battling Spectra Energy-owned Nexus Pipeline in Ohio. Because of the years I've spent doing research, I know that in general, people are woefully or blissfully unaware of the many ways in which their rights are violated every day. I learned about Nexus Pipeline when I returned from the Arctic. I was doing research on the circumpolar areas and environmental changes as a toxic tort. Literally, within 30 minutes of receiving my letter, my neighbors and I were sitting face to face with a land agent who explained to us that a pipeline was coming to our front yard. And this is my house and how close they want to put the pipeline to it. Okay? As you can see, I could literally hand the bulldozer driver a cup of coffee out the front window, but since you're busting up my well, no coffee for you. The land agent further explained that we should sign that day so we could get our best deal. Fighting the pipeline would be useless. They could invoke eminent domain, and they could get what they need. My neighbors didn't understand, and they certainly didn't understand it as a violation of their rights. They simply didn't get it. We started to mobilize and create groups in charge of to change the path of the pipeline. I worked with the people in Eastern Ohio. I'd never been to Eastern Ohio, but I went there. We soon had a coalition of people along the 250-mile path of the pipeline. We reached out to our local elected officials. We learned that they too were clueless about what was coming their way. Spectra had met with them on several occasions and gave them the rainbows and lollipops view of how wonderful a large diameter, high pressure pipeline would be for our community. They invited us to open houses where we got free keychains and stuff, and they could discuss the benefits of the pipeline. There was no discussion. It was a divide and conquer thing to show individuals their own portion of the route. I know my yard, not the entirety of the route. We were separated from our neighbors because what they had to say was confidential. And the elected officials were wined and dined away from us. Okay? We formed several local groups, and we sought to pass resolutions. Township trustees, county commissioners, etc. Any local official that would help us. They all passed resolutions. No one wanted the pipeline. No one. Resolutions, though, are legally not worth the paper they're written on. Naively, people believe that their elected officials represent them and the will of the people. We turned to members of Congress, our senators, our government. We asked them to visit us. We tried to visit them. Even the county commissioners wrote letters. They called. They tried to get them to come to us. No one, not one representative came to us. No one. And they didn't meet us when we went to them. We commissioned studies, gave research about the dangers of the pipeline, spoke at all manner of town hall meetings, city council meetings, county commissioners meetings across the state, educating them about the pipeline. They didn't understand either. One day, a township trustee came to me and said, "I'll let you know what happens at the big meeting tomorrow. Spectra's coming." And I said, "What big meeting?" They said, "Oh, it's going to be at the university." Well, I'm going to go. They said, "Well, you can't go. It's only for elected officials." And I'm like, "That's illegal. That's a violation of Ohio Sunshine Law. I'm going." He said, "It is? That's an elected official who's representing me, and I'm paying for him." Several of us went. Spectra tried to stop us from talking, but that's not going to work. We spoke anyway. We gave them danger about the pipeline, told them about the data. The elected officials that were there, finally our senators and everything that went to hear Spectra, were shocked that there were people actually opposed to it. The public was not informed, were not invited. Invitations were only sent to elected officials so that they could be the audience for Spectra's wonderland of lies with no dissenting voices or data. So this is happening all across the route. One of our representatives, Bob Latta, Ohio House of Representatives, gave short notice one day that he would be at a town hall meeting at the county commissioner's office. We alerted the farmers. Guess what? He's coming. Let's go. The farmers literally came off their fields in overalls with their boots caked in mud to come talk to them. They wanted to talk to him together as a group. They wanted to talk to the person they elected that represented them about their concerns. He literally works for them. And he said he would not meet with them as a group. He would only meet with us individually. I said, hey, they're going to waive their rights. They want to meet with you as a group. He still refused. And this happens to people every day, all across the state, everywhere. So how does this happen? One, people don't know the law. It's not something we teach at every level in school. We should start when they're very young. Because they get into situations, they learn about the law too late. Okay, it's too late. People are busy. Nobody has time for this. We have jobs, families, bills to pay. We don't have time to devote to fighting or learning about things, the forces of evil who are trying to strip our rights. For the folks who work for big energy, it's their full-time job. Their jobs are our headache, okay? The cognitive demands of learning about hard lessons of fighting your rights for your rights are exhausting and insurmountable. 3, and most importantly, despite what we're taught in school, your elected officials do not always represent you or your best interests. Big energy donates to them, and then they are beholden to them. The allure of money is a powerful thing. It is an addiction. It's more dangerous than any drug, even heroin, especially in a society that's addicted to money. Like any addiction, once someone is addicted to this cavalcade of cash, they will quite literally sell their soul and the planet to keep it coming. So I attached a list of people in our area, our representatives, and how much they got and how much they voted for big energy. Our biggest violator is Senator Rob Portman. That's right, I'm naming names. He got over $1,600,000, just him alone. Wow. Right? And he voted with big energy 100% of the time. Okay? It is not ironic that I'm following the speakers from Massachusetts. I was born and raised in a town that's in Spector's Crosshairs, and I own property there, Fall River, Massachusetts. So wherever I go, Spector follows. So you may want to stay away from me. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Janet Barrow. I'm from Florida. We're affected by the Sable Trail pipeline down there. It's actually like 5 pipelines coming through Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, and they were all reviewed under one environmental impact statement. Anyway, it's about 600 miles. I tried to write something to read. Every time, I tried to keep it to 4 minutes. Every time I would write, it would get longer. I'd try and cut it short, it would get longer. So I can't do it. I've got to speak from my notes, and I'll do the best I can. So I've been following the permitting process for 3 years, and I just felt like I've met so many people, mostly recently, who are against these pipelines and just horrified by the things that are happening to them and to our state of Florida and everything, Georgia, all that. I just felt like I had to come up here and speak. I don't represent an agency or anything. I'm just a grandmother, a ranch manager's wife. So I'll just try and go from my notes a little bit anyway. FERC's website says that FERC approves the siting and abandonment of interstate natural gas pipelines and storage facilities. That's true. That's what it does. It approves them, no matter what. And so since this is a hearing, I'm just asking y'all to call upon FERC to stop being a rubber stamp agency for pipelines. Now, I think that there is too much burden put on rural and less affluent communities. And I came across something from BTU Analytics, an article, and it is entitled something like Dakota Access Pipeline Not in My Backyard. Well, in this article it says, projects that interact with affluent communities bring with them the added risk of vocal opposition. And then it further states, money not only brings additional political influence, but also provides people with the time and means to pursue causes, in this case, environmental and anti-hydrocarbon causes. This is from a stock analysis paper, that I came upon. So, I mean, it's true. They just target communities like ours. We're Dunellen. We're in Marion County, home of all the thoroughbred farms, home of Rainbow Springs. We've got a lot of conservation lands, and in this case, I live on a 10,000-acre cattle ranch that my husband's been manager for more than 30 years. I know the land very well. There's wetlands, there's sandhills, there's sinkholes. Rainbow Springs is just a short distance away. I mean, it's like a mile, 1.6 miles, 1.7 miles from where they want to put the pipeline. On the other side is Rock Springs. It's an unknown spring. I mean, historically it was known because, there was a stop on the military wagon trails, and there was a post office, there was a railroad there. We still use the old railroad bed. But it seems the state has just forgotten about it. And so right in between is where this pipeline goes. They're equidistant, like 3.3 miles between them and the pipeline smack dab in the middle. But I'm going to try and get back to what I was going to say. So 6 miles of the pipeline go through the ranch. And Dunellen High School and Elementary School, oh dear, okay. They're a half a mile from where this pipeline goes. I'm going to have to, if I only have 1 minute, I've got to speed it up and just skip a lot of stuff. But there are the schools right there, and this is a karst feature. These are like, and here's where the pipeline goes. Up here is a sinkhole. There are several sinkholes this one's right on the route, and they don't even acknowledge it. I've got the documents in here how they acknowledge the sinkhole as a small, slowly developing closed depression. But it's a sinkhole. I mean, there's a Jeep in the bottom of it, and the pipeline goes right by it. And then there's another one that is within a quarter mile. The data that they used, this, Cardno, which is the consulting firm that did this, it's 1997 data. So this other sinkhole that I've tried to tell FERC about, it opened up in 2001. At the time that they wrote this, they claimed that it was a shallow closed depression. I tried to reconcile all this with the state of Florida, the Department of Environmental Protection, and get the geologists to talk to me to reconcile the differences. And the state of Florida's attorneys wouldn't let them talk to me about Sable Trail. So I've got more. I could speak for hours. Just this 1997 data, there's a little disclaimer here where Cardno won't be responsible for any damages or anything from the result of what they're putting in the environmental impact statement. Anyway, I wish that I could tell you a lot more, because there is, and just we've got to stop this.
Thank you.